One of the biggest reasons I've been loving Baldur's Gate 3 so much is because it actually delivers on something that so many RPGs promise, but rarely ever commit to: meaningful choices. A lot of RPGs love to market themselves around player choice. They tell you that your decisions matter and that your story is unique. But after playing enough of them, you start noticing the pattern. You're given what looks like a big decision, with maybe a few dialogue options, and maybe a choice between helping one faction or another. But no matter what you pick, the story usually funnels back into the same major events. You may get slightly different dialogue or a different reward, but the overall experience stays mostly the same. Baldur's Gate 3 feels completely different though, and this really clicked for me early on in Act 1 with Arabella. You're presented with this seemingly small moment where you can choose to save her from Kaga or leave her to her fate. In most RPGs, this would be a pretty standard side interaction. Save the child, get some gold or approval points, and then move on with your day. But in Baldur's Gate 3, that choice actually matters. Later in the game, Arabella can show up again, and suddenly, the small Act 1 interaction feels like it had real weight behind it. It wasn't just a throwaway side quest. You actually impacted someone's life and got to see the results of that decision later on. And that's what makes Baldur's Gate 3 so fun for me. It makes the world feels like it remembers you. And Arabella is far from the only example. If you free Dame Aelin in Act 2, she doesn't just serve her purpose and disappear forever. She continues to be relevant later in Act 3. She shows up again and her presence has real impact on future events. It makes the decision to free her feel so much more meaningful because you aren't just making a choice for a short-term reward or outcome. You're actively shaping the future of your playthrough. And the same thing happens with Yurgir. If you kill Yurgir in the Gauntlet of Shar, you may later run into him again when confronting Raphael. And that's such a cool detail because it reinforces the idea that your choices are woven throughout the entire game, rather than being isolated to a single moment. The game constantly rewards you for paying attention and engaging with its choices. And because of this, the consequences feel real. Not fake consequences where the game gives you the illusion of punishment before putting you back on the intended path, but instead, real consequences. Take the Grove, for example. At first, this decision seems fairly simple. Side with the Tieflings and Druids, or side with Minthara and the Goblins. At face value, this feels like a classic good versus evil choice. But what makes it interesting is how much the game commits to your decision. If you save the Grove, you build relationships with the Tieflings, and you get to see parts of their story continue later into the game. But if you raid the Grove with Minthara, you aren't just choosing the evil route. You're literally wiping out an entire community. Characters like Will and Karlach can leave or refuse to join you entirely. Questlines disappear, entire interactions are removed from your playthrough. The world shifts around what you choose. And that's why I love this game, because it doesn't try to soften that decision. It doesn't say, don't worry, here's an alternate version of the same content. No, you made the choice, and now your world is fundamentally different because of it. And that makes decisions feel so much heavier. What's even cooler is how the choices become more morally complex as the game goes on. In early Act 1, a lot of decisions are fairly straightforward. You can usually identify what the heroic or villainous choice is pretty quickly. This helps establish your character and lets you settle into whatever role you want to play. But as you get deeper into Act 2 and 3, things become much less clear. Without spoiling too much, the game starts presenting you with actual dilemmas. One example is Shadowheart. Do you allow her to become a Dark Justiciar and fulfill what she believes is her life purpose? Or do you intervene because you think you know what's best for her? Neither option feels completely clean. On one hand, letting her continue down her path respects her free will and the beliefs that she's built her life around. But on the other hand, you feel like those beliefs are built on manipulation and you want to save her from that future. There's not a clear right or wrong answer, and no matter what you choose, the consequences are significant. And this is such good role playing. Another great example I love is Gortash. When you first meet him, you can choose to ally with him rather than immediately opposing him. Maybe your character sees value in avoiding unnecessary fights, or thinks it's smarter to cooperate for now and betray him later. And that's such a fun type of decision because it isn't about choosing good or evil. It's about deciding how your specific character would navigate through the situation. And this is where Baldur's Gate 3 really shines. The choices stop being, what's the correct answer, and instead become, what would my character do here? And that subtle shift completely changes how you engage with the game. Even small things help reinforce this feeling. Your Dream Guardian remembering if you saved or destroyed the Grove is such a cool detail. It reminds you that the game is constantly tracking your actions and building your story around them. The world itself feels reactive instead of static, and that's a huge difference. Another reason why I love the choices in this game is because they feel natural. A lot of games feel like they're artificially inserting decisions just for the sake of it, for having branching paths. You can almost see the game designer tapping you on the shoulder saying, "Okay, player, time for a morality choice." But I don't get that same feeling from Baldur's Gate 3. The choices emerge naturally from the story. They happen at believable crossroads where your character would realistically need to decide how to proceed. And it feels organic, not forced. And because of that, the role playing feels so much stronger. I also think this is one of the biggest reasons the game is so replayable. After finishing a playthrough, it's almost impossible not to wonder what would have happened if you made different choices. What if I sided with Minthara? What if I let Shadowheart go down a darker path? Or what if I allied with Gortash? And not to mention, replaying as origin characters makes this even better. For example, playing as Will changes certain decisions dramatically. As a Tav, deciding whether Will should kill Karlach feels like an interesting choice. But playing as Will himself, that choice now feels way more personal. Now it isn't you deciding what's best for another character. It's your decision, your pact, and your consequences. That perspective shift makes these moments completely different and adds even more replayability. Overall, Baldur's Gate 3 just understands what makes choices satisfying. It isn't just about giving the player options, it's making those options matter.